All right, welcome to today's webinar on customizing evaluations and your feedback system. The objective for today is for you to be able to maximize the impact of the evaluations that you're doing. And of course, a lot of the things that I'll be focusing on is not only on how you actually design evaluation forms, which I will be reviewing quite extensively with you, but also focusing on services that we are introducing both now and in the coming months that will really enhance your utilization of evaluations. And we want you to use and implement evaluations that are really geared towards maximizing the benefits of education and training for your trainees, be it residents, fellows, or students. I estimate today's webinar should be somewhere around an hour and a half. It may go a little bit longer, depending on questions and some of the content that I'm covering. We're going to cover evaluation design, understanding how you design those evaluations and tailor them to your program-specific needs, and how to incorporate any custom questions or scales that you might need to get more insight on the information that you want to collect on your trainees' performance or your faculty performance. And we'll definitely talk about Milestone 2.0 integration and how to integrate that into your ACGME milestone reporting. And as part of that, we'll talk about data mapping, where you can map data to the actual milestones and how to maximize that process as well. So we're going to start off right off the bat with the evaluation design process. We're going to focus on how do you write custom questions, how do you develop custom scales, and how do you then design custom evaluations. We want to focus on three things that I want you to learn to apply to your daily thought process. When you design evaluations, we want them to be competency-based. That's number one. Number two, we want to make sure that the assessments themselves are objective, not subjective. The idea of a subjective would be asking a person, how would you rate this resident's performance? And you give them a scale of excellent, good, and poor. That's a subjective scale versus an objective scale would be the idea of asking in response that they are not competent, they are competent, and then they are ready for independent practice, for example. In that case, it becomes more objective. Subjectivity is the difference between how I feel about someone and how someone else feels about that same resident. That becomes subjective. And the other important point that we want you to focus on is actually changing some of your thought processes in clinical assessments to be more focused on narrative-based evaluations. These would be evaluations where there are either no scores at all or very few scores being given to the trainee. Instead, they're narrative-based, and we're going to talk about those as well. And then we'll also touch on copying and sharing evaluation templates, whether it be sharing evaluation templates between two institutions that are not directly affiliated with each other. We've got somebody on the West Coast, somebody on the East Coast of the United States, and you want to share your forms with each other. There's a process for doing that. And within your own institution, how you can share evaluations amongst yourselves. So let's get right into talking about creating custom questions. So there's a couple of different options. So the process here is I'll go through the slides. I'm going to show you specific things, and then we'll do a demonstration where I'll go through the details and show you how to actually do it on the screen. So first, I want you to watch through some of these options, try to learn the language and be familiar with it, and then we'll go deeper into this. Now, some of you may very well be very familiar with some of these items. Nevertheless, consider this a quick review for yourselves as well. So everything we're doing today is going to be accessible from the menu option Evaluations. And under the Evaluations menu, there's a subsection called Design and Manage Evaluations. And you'll see several options there. And today we're going to focus on all those various options. And for example, here we're looking at the menu option evaluations. Today we're going to focus on design and manage evaluation section. So you can see that's what I'm focusing on. The first item will be under manage question database. So under the manage question database, you're able to add your own questions, edit questions. Very important, you can actually move questions to another category. So if in the past, someone may have designed an evaluation and added questions into a competency that is incorrect, you can always move a question from one competency into another. You can delete a question. So it's a question that you don't want to use anymore, or it was added incorrectly and you just want to delete it from the database. If it was never used, you can delete it. Or you can inactivate a question. That would be an old question that you were using before. You cannot delete it because it has data, but you want to just inactivate it so it doesn't show up anymore when you're designing an evaluation. And of course, this is where you can also map the various questions to the milestones as well. So this is option number one. And if we go to that menu option evaluations and we look under the design and manage evaluations, we see we have the managed question database available right there. We click right and go into that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to select an audience, a subject, and a question category. So all the questions that are in my evaluations are always categorized based on audience, that's your evaluator, and the subject, that's the evaluatee. And they're further categorized based on what we call question categories, which are the competencies. That's inclusive of the core competencies and any additional competencies you might be tracking within your program. So once you select the audience, the subject, and the question category, the next step is for you to be able to select adding a question into the system. That lets you add questions, and on the right-hand side, you see you have options here for editing a question. You can edit a question only if that question has not been already used or has data with it. We do not allow you to edit a question that has data associated with it. For the very simple fact, just think about a question that says, what's your favorite food? You go ahead and give all the answers, and somebody goes back in and changes that question to say, what's your least favorite food? Now, all the responses you gave before was in response to the question of what's your favorite food. Now you've gone ahead and changed the question, and it changes the response. So for the integrity of the evaluation data, we actually do not allow you to edit or delete a question that is in use. Instead, you can inactivate the question by clicking on the active button, and that will simply inactivate it. You can always move a question from one question category into another question category as well. So those are all the different actions that you have on the far right-hand side. And then, of course, here in the middle, you have the option for map to milestones. And again, I'm going to go back and review all of this step by step with you as part of the demo, where we're actually going to do hands-on work with it. So when you click map to milestones, by default, the system will bring up the question category you're in to show you the milestones related to that question category. And you'll see during the actual hands-on that you can actually mix and match milestone groups into a single question as well. And I'll review that shortly. Now, the second option is for you to actually create questions when you're designing an evaluation. So maybe you start designing an evaluation and you had no idea you needed a question. So you can actually add a question during the actual design and evaluation process. You can see here there's the design and evaluation express and custom. As we'll learn later on today, the main difference between the design and evaluation express and design and evaluation custom is just the way you are assigning scales to the evaluation. With design and evaluation express, it's expressed because you pick one scale, and that one scale will apply to all the questions in the evaluation. with design and evaluation custom, you're able to assign different questions and scales to one another. So you can mix and match your scales within a specific evaluation. Of course, that takes more effort because you have to select a question and then select a scale. So that's why we call the other module Design and Evaluation Express. So irrespective of which one of the two modules that you use, when you get to the step for selecting questions, you can see here all the question categories are listed. Again, we'll look at this during the hands-on process, but at the very top, you have an option to choose from the available questions and to add questions. So you can either choose a question or you can simply type in your question and add it directly into the evaluation without you having to go into the database and add it. There's also a filter on the right-hand side where you can actually look up a particular question. So you can type in a keyword and click search, and the system will display all the questions that are available with those keywords in it. So this is a very quick and easy way for you to add questions. Notice that the question category by default is unspecified. So if the evaluation happens to be designed by someone who's not sure what category the question belongs to, they can always add it into the unspecified category, and later on you're able to move that question into the appropriate category. So absolutely no worries in that context. Now, those are your two easy ways of adding questions into your evaluation form. Now let's talk a little bit about our answer scales. So under that same menu option of evaluations, under the design and manage evaluations, you have an option to manage answer scales. Here, you're able to not only add answer choices, but you can click on the view all mode in order to look at the various scales that are available, meaning to actually look at what the scale looks like when you click on view all mode. Or you can add your own scale. On the right-hand side, you notice you have an option to edit a scale, you can copy the scale, and if the scale is not being used, you're also able to delete a scale. Again, anytime something is in use and you've already collected data on it, you can neither edit it nor can you delete it. That's a very important concept I want you to keep in mind. Now, as part of the evaluation customization process, when we're thinking about designing evaluations that are competency-based, we talked about evaluations that are objective rather than being subjective, and we talked about narrative-based evaluations. It's really important that you consider the specific scale that you're going to use in that evaluation. Many times you'll notice on evaluation forms, you start to get responses where everybody's getting a 4 or everybody's getting 5s. And the problem happens with evaluators getting exhausted with all the questions that are within an evaluation. So they just think on a 1 to 5 scale, oh, he's a 4 or she's a 4, without really paying attention to what a 4 is or what a 5 is. And this is where it becomes important that the scales that you design really have the right characteristics. Are we going to show numbers, or do we just want to show the description itself? So if somebody is competent, do we show a number 3 with the word competent next to it, or do we just show the word competent without the number 3? And these are important tricks, and I call them tricks because they're psychological ploys on getting people to pay attention to the scale rather than paying attention to the numbers. So let's learn a little bit about the different scales that are available. So we offer a cacophony of scales, from everything from a 1 to 2 scale all the way up to a 1 to 100 scale. There are yes and no scales. There's alphabetical scales from A through F, reminiscent of when we were in school. There are free form scales. These are text scales where people can provide narratives. Then there are 2 other scales we call numeric and percentage scales. And then there's this option for a blank scale. This is what we might use with a heading. So let's go through this a little bit and become a little bit familiar. So overall, all the Likert scales are going to be numerical. Now, whether they're going to be a drop-down scale or a sliding scale is irrelevant. That means whether it's going to be from left to right, or you click on a drop-down and it opens up. These are all the same idea. They're considered a Likert or a range scale. The next option are yes-no scales. And yes-no scales can be yes all of the time, no none of the times. It could have something in the middle. Yes, some of the times. So you can have ranges within a yes-no scale as well. It doesn't have to be binary. It doesn't just have to be a yes and no, but it can be anything in the middle as well. Then here we have the alpha scale I mentioned, and then we have our freeform scales, and at the bottom we have our numeric scale, percentage scale. So that the numeric scale, for you to keep in mind, this would be used for the purpose of asking a count. So maybe in an evaluation form, you want to ask the faculty in a clinic setting, how many patients per day are you evaluating with the resident? And you want to provide them with a numerical range where it's numbers from 0, let's say up to 20. So you would create a numerical count scale. The numerical count scale and the percentage scale, the one right after it, neither one of these are included within the competency performance of a trainee. So in other words, if you add a question into patient care that's based on a numerical counts or a percentage scale, then values are not included in calculating their milestone performance, because they are considered for measuring a count or a percentage of time. So a percentage scale might be used in a setting when you're asking what percent of your time do you spend working with residents, and you want to provide a range to a faculty, 5%, 10%, 25%, 50%. So that would be the purpose of a percentage scale. And then last on the list is the blank no answer scale. The no answer scale is typically used to create a heading or a subheading within a competency where we have a paragraph that is a description. It doesn't have a scale associated with it, so we'll use the no answer scale. You'll typically see this in a design and evaluation custom evaluation. So in that custom evaluation, we'll use a blank no answer scale option. So let's go look into some of the options that are set up when we are designing our evaluation form. So first option here in customizing our scales is always keep in mind that scales are designed from low score to high score. That means on the 0 and 1 side, that's always going to be the lower performance, and the higher the number is, that's the higher performance. So you always want to design your scales in that manner. I see sometimes folks are designing their scales the other way around. That's going to be problematic for you if you start designing the scales kind of upside down. So you want to make sure that you're putting good descriptions for each scale. Whether this is where you have to consider using either the scales we've already provided, which I'll review some of those with you shortly, or you're going to utilize scales that you're going to build yourself. This is where you want to make sure that those descriptors are objective. So these are examples of subjective things like very poor, as expected, as who expected. I don't know. Well, your expectations are different than my expectations. So you want to be careful with these types of subjective scales. When you're designing a scale, it is possible for the scale to actually not have a response for everything. So in this case, we've designed a scale where we have excluded a value for the number 2. So you can leave that blank, check off the option for exclude, and then the consequence is when you present that scale, it will not display the numerical value for 2. So these are options of how would I exclude a particular level. We sometimes will use this for PGY specific scales, where we want to maybe exclude the number, a score for 5 or a score for 4, because we don't expect maybe a PGY1 resident to have that higher level of performance. So we want to focus more on the lower, more remedial and competent based performance. Then we have an option here to display scores. Do we want to display scores? We see an option here on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or do we just not want to display the scores? Generally, I recommend that you do not display the scores. That helps in getting people to pay attention to the questions rather than paying attention to the scores. The system is still collecting a score for you. It will still present a score, and it will tell you what the table is that matches up scores to the descriptions, but it will leave the score off from displaying to the user so that the user can focus on the actual description instead of the numerical value on the scale. Then we have an option here for sliding scale. So do we want to design an evaluation that is on a sliding scale format, or do we want to design it as a drop-down scale format? What we call a sliding scale is simply a scale that's open with radio buttons. You still have the option to not display the scores, so you can turn that off, but you choose whether you want your evaluation to be in a sliding scale format or a drop-down scale format. What are the advantages or disadvantages between these two? If you want an evaluation to be easier for people to complete, you have to focus both on the length and the number of clicks they have to do. So if you create an evaluation form that typically has more than 7 questions, you are making an evaluation that is more cumbersome for people to complete. So we want to try to limit the number of questions to 7. The absolute maximum that I advise you would be 10, but the recommended number of questions is 7. Yes, just 7 questions on an evaluation, but of course you can add as many as you want. The next point you want to consider is the number of clicks people have to make. If you create a scale that's based on a drop-down, the user will have to click the drop-down once in order to open the scale, and then click it a second time in order to select the option. So that's 2 clicks. If you have 7 questions, that's 14 clicks. If you have a sliding scale, that would be 7 clicks only, because they don't have to expand anything. The main disadvantage of a sliding scale, it takes more space on the screen. So it takes more vertical space than a drop-down scale. So you have to be thoughtful about how you're designing your evaluation so it's easy for the evaluators to complete. That's where you want to consider that sliding scale format. Now, there is an option right above it for multi-select option, and I will review that when I go directly into the review of this process. In short, the multi-select option allows you to create a scale that has more than one answer. You can imagine utilizing that. You have to be very careful, because you would not put that on a standard assessment form. You wouldn't ask, how is this resident's patient care? And you give a multi-select option. It wouldn't be meaningful. So a multi-select option is primarily used for asking people questions on a survey. Which one of the following are items that you learned during the conference? And you would provide them a multi-select option where they could choose which options they learned. So be very careful and mindful about utilizing something like that. So from there, we look at these options we have here for early warning and exceeds expectations. So when we're looking at early warning and exceed expectations, these are indices that you can choose to include. You're not obligated to include them. You can choose to include them within an evaluation. An early warning is a low score that triggers a comment. So when someone receives a low score, let's say in this case, if I select 1 as my early warning index, anytime the evaluator selects 1, they will be required to provide an explanation. It's not optional. They will be required to provide an explanation. If I select an early warning index of 2, then they would be prompted for an explanation for a score of 2 or lower. So a 1 or 2 would both prompt them to provide an explanation. And the opposite is correct for the exceeds expectation. With exceeds expectation, we are prompting an explanation for a high score. So imagine you have an evaluation that has a score of 5, and on the 5, it's ready for independent practice or at attending level. And every time the faculty gives a score of 5, it would prompt them to provide an explanation. Hey, they're able to teach others, or they're an expert. Can you please explain to me how you see that? The idea there is you don't expect that a resident would be at that level of 5. So anytime they're getting a 5, you're prompting them with an exceeds expectation notification. Now, both the early warning and the exceeds expectation, both of these will actually trigger an early warning or an exceeds expectation notification to the program director. So anytime you select early warning or exceeds expectation, keep in mind that the system will send an early warning or exceeds expectation email to the program director, letting them know right away that somebody either received an early warning or an exceeds expectation notification. So let's look at some of the other options on our evaluation form. We have the option for shared. So notice here, do we want to design our scale to be shared or not? So by default, all the scales you design are just purely for your department. They are private. They are just for your department. If you create a scale that's marked as shared, that scale will be available to all the departments that are linked to you. So be careful about sharing your scales, because you could potentially create a mess in other people's departments. But this is one of the ways you're able to collaborate with colleagues. Now, I apologize, the next item here on the slide appears to be overlapping. So I'm going to not show it, but what it's referring to is hide empty scores. You remember I showed you the idea of excluding a specific item? Well, excluding a specific item is an action that you're taking where you're saying, I want to exclude a 0. You can exclude a specific item. Hide empty scores will automatically hide any of the answer options that does not have a description associated with it. So that's just an option that's available for you there. So now let's go right into some hands-on and take a look at our options here. So I'm under the menu option evaluations. I'm zooming in on the screen here, so things will appear a little bit disorienting because normally I'm looking at my screen at this size and this is my screen at 100%. So I'm zooming in here to 160% just to make it easier for you to be able to see the screen. So we looked here under design and evaluation, design and manage evaluation. So let's go and take a look at this hands-on a little bit with managed question database. Now I'm in a department that's based for residents. So the system is automatically defaulting to the attending evaluator and the resident evaluatee. I have different options here. I can go into any of the databases and take a look at any of these options. Under question categories, there are a multitude of question categories. You'll notice that the core competencies are highlighted in a blue color just to highlight them for you, nothing else. You'll also notice that there's an option selected here for hide unused categories. If you unselect this, the system will show you all the question categories that are available in the database. This can include categories that are just empty. They don't have anything in them whatsoever. So I'm going to select one of the core competencies. I'll select interpersonal communication skills. And under this option, it's going to display all the available questions that are in my database here. On the right-hand side, I see there are a total of 861 questions available. I can see that there are multiple pages for me to go through to see my questions. I can ask it, click this option here just to display inactive questions that I want to review. And I can scroll through here and I can see all the various questions that are in my particular database. As I scroll down to the bottom, I can see the questions listed here. I can see that this question is being used in these particular evaluations. So I can see the name of each evaluation form that is using that particular question. And on the right-hand side, I can see the milestones that have been mapped to this question. Now, keep in mind, in this webinar, I'm using my Hope Medical Center demo account. And in this demo account, we have all of the milestone groups listed. So when you see multiple listings for ICS-1 or ICS-2 or 3, it's only because we have different groups listed here for purposes of demonstration. So don't fret over that. You'll see on the right-hand side that the edit and delete actions are grayed out, and they're grayed out, they're crossed out because they're being used in an evaluation of collected data. Now I can click on the word active. It's going to toggle that question and make that question inactive. So once that question is inactive, it's taken out of circulation. I can always go back to display my inactive questions if I want to see those inactive questions and restore them. So simply clicking on display inactive questions, it will bring up those questions, and I can click on the word inactive and it will make it active. So that's just a very easy way for us to hide items that we don't want to see by just clicking them and making them active or inactive. I can edit any of these questions and delete them if they're not being used. When you click Map to Milestones, I'll get a pop-up window. I just have to bring that over. As I mentioned, this is our demo account, so I have all of the milestone groups listed in here. So please don't fret over that. This is just because of demo purposes. So if I focus on, for example, going to internal medicine milestone group. So under internal medicine, I can select that competency of interpersonal communication skills. It will show me the sub-competencies for interpersonal communication skills. So I can select ICS-1 and I can map that to this particular question. I can then go map again and go to internal medicine again. And I can select professionalism. And I can map that same question to professionalism simultaneously. So now that question is mapped to both interpersonal communication skills and professionalism. We're going to review this in more detail later on as well. So going back to the menu option evaluations, well, actually, while I'm here under this manage question database, let's also take a look at add question as well. So when I select add a question, one of the tricky things that seems to get people is the question code. The system is going to put in a question code based on the last question code that has been added into this particular category. Question codes are a way for you to manage your questions. The only thing that you need to know about it is that it needs to be a unique value. It doesn't have to be numerical. It doesn't have to be alpha. It can be a mix of alpha numeric. So the way we tend to put our codes in is based on a particular evaluation form that we're making. We're focusing on a particular subject area, and then we're saying this is interpersonal communication skills. And then we will always start our questions with a 001. We don't start the questions as 1. And the reason we don't do that is when you have alphanumeric numbers, once you get to question 11 will be sorted directly under question 1. So in order to avoid that, we have a leading 0, we do 001. When we get to question 11, we want it to be 011. Be careful not to make it 0011 because that will also change the sorting as well. Once I add question 001 into here, so again, you use the alphanumeric value that is important for you, but once you add this question into the database, when you come back to add another question, the system will give you the next question code as 003. It will intentionally skip a number, and it skips that number because we want to give you a cushion in case later on you want to come back and add another question. You can add it as 002. The only idea there is for you not to have to manually resort the questions later on. So these are just little tricks that I'm teaching you on this webinar to be aware. So here you would add your questions in here, whatever your question is, you would type it in. And now at the bottom of the screen here, we have a number of options. Do we want to include question comments? If you say yes, the system will add an optional comment field to this question. So you have to be very careful about using this optional comments, because if you're already using an early warning and exceeds expectation on the scale, the last thing you want to do is overburden the evaluator with yet another comment field. So the purpose of adding a question comments is for a specific question where, for example, you might ask the evaluator, how is this resident's patient care skills? And you have a scale. And then you go on in the question and you say, please use the space below to provide an example of this resident's patient care skills that you've observed. So now you're asking them to rate it with the scale, and you're providing them with a field for them to write a specific example of an encounter. So be very, very judicious about selecting the question comments. Confidential to evaluatee option. If you mark this question as confidential to the evaluatee, then the particular score and response given to this question and the question itself will be hidden from the evaluatee. So if this is an attending of resident evaluation, you could possibly have some questions on that form that you don't want visible to the resident. The whole form is reviewable by the resident, but you can make some questions confidential so the resident does not see them at all. The next three options here for director and administrator and global administrator editable, 99.99999% of the time, you should leave those options as no. These options allow the appropriate group of director, administrator, or global administrator to actually change the score on the evaluation form. So the attending gave a score of 5. The program director thinks the resident should really get a score of 3. That would allow the program director to change that scale. You should not be doing that within your residency or fellowship programs. This option is most compatible with medical students where the director for a program is issuing the final grade and will review the evaluations typically and will make changes prior to the evaluation form being submitted to the medical school. So otherwise, I recommend that you always leave that. Then you can either save that question or save and add another. So that covers your whole process of adding questions into the question database. Now, I can either go back to the menu evaluations here or click on the shortcut menu. It doesn't matter. It's going to take me back to the same destination. Let's take a quick look at Manage Answer Scales here as well. Under Manage Answer Scales, let's go back into our 100% view for a second, just so you can see. In this demo account, you can see I've got a laundry list of scales that are available. Some of you will have a very large group of scales available as well. This is my drop down with my Likert scales, my yes, no, A to F, free form, numerical percentage, and no answer scale as well. So focusing on the 1 to 5 scale or the option for 1 to 5 with halves. The 1 to 5 with halves is consistent with the ACGME milestone reporting options, where we have a scale of 1 to 5 with halves, which is also similar to the scale of 1 to 9. Some programs like to use. Whichever one you use, the system is perfectly comfortable with it and will provide you with your ACGME milestone reporting and any other reporting that you're doing, irrespective of which numerical scale you choose. Even if you choose to use a 1 to 4 scale, the system will still fit these numerical values into your milestone reporting process. So don't think that you are obligated to only use a 1 to 5 with halves scale. You could use whatever scale that fits your particular needs at any given time. So I want to focus on just that topic of objective and subjective scales. So if we look at some of the scales here, like for example, we have a scale that's level of readiness. So this looks like an ACGME scale, right? In this case, we don't have any descriptors that are meaningful. It's level 1, 2, 3, 4. You understand that something like this is not only subjective, but it doesn't allow the evaluator an opportunity to even know what that particular scale means. So let's focus on what are some of the scales that you all have within your database. So all of your programs will have these scales that are called proficiency-based scales. So I want you to review some of these proficiency-based scales to become familiar with them. Then you'll have some of these subjective scales that we call agreement scales. That's the contrast I want you to be familiar with. So if we look at our proficiency-based scales, so we're just going to open some of these proficiency-based scales just to review them. The idea of remedial, developing competency, competent, proficient, expert, this is an example of a more objective-based scale rather than a subjective-based scale. So looking at the other options, so for example, I have this here. If I select exclude here for 0, now the 0 will no longer show on that particular scale. If I unselect the option for display scores, then the option is, and if you hover over the information, it'll give you the details. Now the evaluator will only see remedial, developing competency, competent, proficient, expert. They will no longer see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or the 0 value. So that's the idea here. Now, if I change this scale to a multi-select, so it turns red and it says, are you sure you really want to do this? And of course, if you leave it unchecked, it says good choice, because we're really trying to discourage you from selecting a multi-select answer option, because it doesn't make sense to select remedial and proficient at the same time. I can change the scale from a drop down to a sliding scale. So that's something that allows me to change that easily. If I add an early warning value for remedial, and I can add an exceeds expectation for expert. Now, anytime somebody's getting a remedial score, they'll be prompted to provide an explanation, and anytime somebody's getting an expert, they will be prompted to provide an explanation. Be very careful here. If you're designing an evaluation form that will be used for both PGY1 assessments as well as PGY5 assessments, it's a problem if you make early warning for remedial, because we expect a PGY1 in their first few months of training to potentially be remedial in certain tasks. And it may not be necessary to mark that as an early warning because we expect them to be remedial. We don't expect them to be experts. So be mindful that if you're designing an evaluation form that is for multiple PGY levels, it may not be appropriate to have an early warning index of 1 for a PGY1 assessment, but certainly if I'm designing an evaluation that is for senior residents who are graduating imminently, I may even choose to make a 3 as an early warning on that assessment, or for sure a 2 an early warning, because I don't expect that a resident who is imminently graduating in their senior year to be either remedial or developing competency. I would expect them at the minimum to be competent. So again, this is your mindfulness of what you're using on that particular evaluation. Now, you're looking at this screen through my interface as a system administrator, so I'm able to add scales that are available system-wide. Otherwise, you only have the options for private and shared, and I've already reviewed that option for you to hide empty scores as well. So the combination of managed question database and managed answer scales are the two main criteria. Now, we're going to come back shortly to the process of designing and evaluations for you to learn quite a bit about that. So let's just continue with our presentation, and then we'll come back to design and evaluation. So with design and evaluation, I already explained to you that there's two modules. There's the express module and the custom module. Let's now break this down. With the express module, this is what you should be using most of the time to easily and quickly design an evaluation. It's the main idea there is you have the same answer scale for all the questions, and you always want to make sure that you're designing objective-based evaluation forms. By the way, as you're looking at this and wondering to yourselves, gosh, I can't possibly be the first person who's ever had to design objective-based evaluations or rotation-specific evaluations or even PGY-specific evaluation forms. We do have multiple databases of evaluations for multiple specialties. So you can always reach out to our client services and ask them to provide you sample evaluations, and we are more than happy to provide any sample evaluations that we have for your particular specialty. And if we don't happen to have it, we're happy to work with you to help you design evaluations if you're not sure how to best design those evaluations. And then so here with the custom, this is where we're going to design a more intricate evaluation form that has different answer scales for each question. So let's go into this and take a look at these options here where we're designing an evaluation. So once we go into design and evaluation, we select our audience or subject. That's our evaluator, evaluatee. We put in a title. There's going to be a number of options here where you're able to select whether you want the evaluation to be anonymous or confidential. So an anonymous evaluation is an evaluation that is simply de-identified, so you don't know who completed that evaluation, and the data is only available in aggregate to the evaluatee. So the results are only available in aggregate to the evaluatee. Now that's different from a confidential evaluation. With a confidential evaluation, and I'm sorry, the feedback confirmation is already turned on, but I'm focusing on, will this be a confidential evaluation? A confidential evaluation is never available to the evaluatee. The evaluatee does not see it. The evaluatee doesn't have a chance to review it. It can only be seen by the program director because we've made that evaluation confidential. I don't recommend that you make evaluations both anonymous and confidential. You generally want to choose one or the other, but there are always exceptions to the rule. So moving forward, again, my apology that there's one of my graphics here is one slide behind. Then we have our feedback confirmation. This is simply asking a question from the evaluator and the evaluatee. Did you provide direct feedback? And asking the evaluatee, did you receive direct feedback? So this will automatically add that question and you can customize the question. The next option that's highlighted here are comments, and it's asking you whether you want comments to be included in the evaluation, and do you want to also include confidential comments? And I will review that as well when we go back through the design and evaluation option. There are a few options over here. One of them is in regards to, will users have the option to send a notice to the program director? This is different than the early warning and exceeds expectation that I mentioned to you. This allows the evaluator to actually just trigger a notice to the program director saying, hey, I want you to look at this evaluation form. You control what the next option is, will this evaluation be used for voluntary evaluations? This controls whether the evaluation can be done ad hoc. Somebody can just go into the system, select this form, and do an evaluation. Then you have options here for, will this evaluation be visible to shared departments? Do you want to share the data with other departments in your institution? So for example, you might be the internal medicine program and you have a transitional program that's linked to you, and you want the results from this form to be visible to the transitional program. So you would select yes. And then we'll take a look at the descriptive criteria when we go through the evaluation. The formative summative option at the very bottom we'll also review. This is the ability for you to create a form that is a formative evaluation. So for example, at the end of every clinic, somebody does an evaluation. We call that formative. Immediately at the end of clinic. And then we could create an identical evaluation form, or maybe a similar evaluation form that has some additional questions, and create that as a summative evaluation. Now, what the system will do, it will take all the formative data and it will summarize it into the summative evaluation form. And we would then assign that summative evaluation form at the end of the clinic rotation. The benefit there is the clinic director or the faculty as a group can sit down and review the summative evaluation. It will include the results of all the formative evaluations that were done on each clinic day. So that's a way for you to be able to combine evaluations together to see a summative result. So let's move through those now. And when you're designing an evaluation, the Express and the Custom module are a little bit different. So when you get to step 2 in the Express, you select a scale. When you get to step 2 in Design Custom, you select the question and the scale simultaneously. And we're going to review that in just a minute. So here, when we go into design and evaluation, when we get into the step for selecting our answer scales, you'll notice that all the competencies will be collapsed by default. We can expand those. We can select those questions by clicking on the checkbox on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you can see you can always click Map to Milestones to map the questions as well. And we looked at this previously, where once you click Map to Milestones, it'll bring up a pop-up for you to select the particular milestone group you want to map to. Now, very quickly, we're going to review the edit evaluations option, which is in contrast to design and evaluation. Here, you have a listing of all the evaluations that you have within your program. So we have a little bit of a little graphic mess happening this morning, but that's okay. We'll just work with it. So please ignore these graphics over here. They are coming out of play. So our publish action is an important action. When you design an evaluation form, that evaluation form is not available for you to use until you publish it. Now, once you publish an evaluation, it's ready for you to assign it. You can always come back and edit a published evaluation in order to take questions out, add new questions with new scales. You can make different changes to the evaluation. You can even change the title of the evaluation. There will be certain restrictions on, you won't be able to change the scale on an existing question, for example, but you'll be able to make other nominal changes to an evaluation that has already been published. You have an edit action that allows you to make those changes. Next to that, you have a QR option. The QR option, again, I'm having some graphic issues here where it's not displaying my next options over here, but the QR option actually allows you to generate a QR code for that particular evaluation form. So you could design a clinic evaluation, and this would be for the end of a clinic period, like for the day. You typically, I would recommend having one single narrative question in there. The faculty could use their My Evaluations mobile app to scan the QR code. It will pop up a voluntary evaluation assignment for them to select the name of the resident they are evaluating, and that's it. They click next and they can fill the evaluation form directly. So that makes it nice and easy. And directly next to that, you have an option for link. Similar to the QR code, except it provides you a link to the evaluation. So we have some programs that are putting those links into the medical record system. So when a faculty is going in to review the medical records of a resident directly within the electronic health record system, there's a link directly to that evaluation form. They click on the link, it brings up the evaluation form. Of course, they are prompted to put in their username and password, and the faculty is able to do an assessment on their medical record completion process as well. Next to that, you have an evaluation history icon that lets you see all the changes that were made to the form. Next to that, you have a duplicate icon. Now all the graphics are coming up. You have a duplicate icon, and then which allows you to copy a form within your department or to copy the form into another department, and then you have the delete action. So let's do a quick review of this process here. We're going to go under the menu option evaluations. We'll go to Design and Evaluation Express. Again, here I'm at 100%. So I'm going to zoom in to 150% so you can see everything. I want to select my audience and my subject. So I'm going to design an attending evaluation of a resident. Or maybe I want to design a mini CEX, or maybe I want to design an evidence-based medicine CEX. This particular form has EBM-based questions directly built into it. So I select, and those are available for fellows as well. So I'll select resident in this example, and we're going to design a sample evaluation. If I'm designing another form that already exists, I might call this version 3. And this is typically how I put version numbers in here. I do not recommend that you put things such as the year, things like version 2024, because 2024 may seem new to you now, but in 2 years when you're still using this form in 2026, the form 2024 will seem quite old. So you typically want to use a version number. Some people will use alpha numbers in here, but I think a version number is sufficient. The alpha version would be important if this is a, let's say this is a clinic evaluation, and you want to design this clinic evaluation for attendings to evaluate residents, but you also want to design a clinic evaluation for the nurses to evaluate the residents. So I might call this A3, so it's the attending version, and then later on I'll create an N3, which is the nurses version. So in order for the evaluations to have the same title, I'll use the version indicator as a way to distinguish the forms. So I reviewed these options with you previously. I'm going to include the descriptive criteria in here as an example. I find that the formative summative option may be a bit advanced for most people, but if I'm designing this as part of a formative summative group, like I explained, I would select yes. The system will ask me, is this particular form formative or is it summative? If I select the option for formative, I am saying that this is the evaluation I'm going to use for my daily assessments or for my weekly assessments. And it asks me display results from reciprocal formative evaluations. So there may be other formative evaluations that are tied into this. So it can get quite complicated in terms of how you're building this. So if I build this clinical evaluation N3 as my formative, I may then later on design a separate form and design that as the summative evaluation form, and the system will tie those results to one another. So I'm going to leave that as a no for right now, but I did include the descriptive criteria so I can show you what that looks like. So when I click next, remember that I'm using Design and Evaluation Express right now. So the next thing that happens here is I'm prompted to select a scale. All those scales that we looked at before are available. By default, the system will always go to the scale of 1 to 5. I have the ability to add my answer choices here. I can also click on Edit Answer Choices. It will give me a pop-up in order for me to go in and edit a scale. Now, why did it bring up this alumni scale? Well, that's the scale that's currently selected, so it brings up that alumni scale, meaning it's the first scale on the list here. I can select any of the other scales that are under the 1 to 5, and it would allow me to go in and make edits. Notice that some of the other items can't be edited. If that scale is currently in use, you won't be able to make edits to save those changes. So as I scroll through here, I want to remind you about that idea of subjective and objective scales. Things such as decidedly inferior, needs more work, far above others. These are examples of subjective scales. Never, infrequently, always is also subjective. And as I scroll down to the section on proficiency scales, you start to see things such as here we can see novice, unfamiliar with steps, lacks intraoperative objective judgment and confidence, or mastered. So this becomes objective in nature. And as I scroll through, I can see other scales here. Cannot perform this skill with or without assistance, can instruct or supervise for this skill. This is an example of an objective scale. So we'll select the particular scale we want. I can hit the End key to go to the bottom. These are examples of sliding scales that I skipped over. They're all available for you as well. Now, because of that scale I selected, it included an early warning. It's allowing me to change the trigger point. If the trigger is set to 2, maybe I'm now designing this evaluation for a PGY2, so I want to change the trigger to 1. So that's completely up to you. Now, as you're designing the evaluations, you'll see the option for save partially. If you design an evaluation and you get interrupted in the middle, you can always click on Save Partially. It will save your data so you can come back to it at a later time. So now I'm in step 3 of Design and Evaluation Express. Recall that I said all the competencies are by default in a collapsed mode. I can click on Expand All, or I can click on a particular competency to expand that particular competency. Now, I've intentionally put some examples here to show you examples of how not to design evaluation forms. So here you have an example of somebody who has actually copied and pasted questions from the milestone group directly into here. Now, what do you see as potential issues here? Number one, they copied and pasted the questions in here as a table from a Word document, meaning a Microsoft Word document. If I click on Edit, I can see exactly what they've added in here. They actually took a table and they put that table directly into here. That's a big no-no. So let me share with you feedback directly from the ACGME. At this last ACGME conference, as of this recording, dated 2024, I had multiple ACGME site evaluators come by my evaluations to learn about some of the tips and tricks that we're doing. And they had watched some of our webinars that they were familiar with because they were doing assessments, and they were very curious about how we are handling this situation, because they are very concerned that programs are using the milestones as part of rotational evaluations. Number one, don't do it. The ACGME does not want you to do milestone assessments for rotation evaluations. Number two, the entire problem with this particular question, it was copied and pasted from Word and put in here. So as a result, all the formatting with the table and the font color and everything else was copied directly into the evaluation as well. The consequence is you can see the black text that's listed in here. Excuse me, that this black text is as a result of copying and pasting the question directly from your Word document into my evaluations. And this is a major, major problem. So one of the things you do not want to do is do not copy questions directly from Microsoft Word and bring them into my evaluations, because it will bring in all the fonts and all the formatting directly into the system, and you will be very, very, very unhappy. This is the type of problem that happens. And when I bring up the actual details of that question, you could see that it brought all the border styles, it brought the colors, it brought everything over from Microsoft Word directly into my evaluations. So be mindful of that. Don't create scales like this. Don't create questions like this. If you are designing a sliding scale question, there is a proper way for you to do that, and that's by designing a sliding scale question, which is reviewed in one of our other webinars, specifically in details on designing your evaluation forms. Otherwise, this is a major problem. So we're going to scroll down. We can see our questions listed here, and we can see that it's listed in these particular evaluation forms. So I can select the questions that I want to include. I can go back up to the top. I can collapse this. I can expand the next competency. Again, I can see these poorly designed questions, and I can go ahead and select more questions. Then I can either go to the very top and click next, or I can go to the bottom and click next. So after I scroll through all the core competency questions, you'll see all the additional competency categories listed alphabetically. The category called overall is always listed at the very, very, very bottom, just for your information. This is also where I'm able to add specific questions, categorize them if I know, and this is where I can filter those questions as well. During this webinar, I am not reviewing entrustable professional activities. That topic is covered on a different webinar that's already available to you under My Help. and will be covered in future webinars once again. So I'm going to click next to go to step 4. Here it's going to show me that that particular evaluation that I've designed with those questions I've selected. Recall that I selected the option to include descriptive criteria. So this is specifically adding a list of words here for the evaluator to select as part of the behaviors of the evaluatee. These words are completely manageable by you. These are the default words that we put into the system, but you're able to customize them. If you go to the menu option evaluations and you scroll under the option for manage evaluation options, you have a section here for manage descriptive criteria that allows you to add more words, edit or delete the words that already exist within the system. So you have no obligation to use these, but this is a good way to help people who are having difficulty in selecting particular behaviors to select characteristics unique to that person. Now, when you're here within the evaluation form, you can move questions. So I can click on this question, how well does the resident develop? Click and hold my mouse, and I can move the questions within that category. I cannot move them outside of the category, that it stays within patient care. If I want to move it, I have to go to the question database to actually move it from there. If I want to move patient care, I can grab that, hold my mouse, and I can move that to the top and change the order of my categories as well. So you can change questions order, and you can change category orders as well. There are some options here at the top for hide competency headings. So if you don't want people to see the competency headings, you can simply hide it if you don't feel that it's useful for them. Later on, after you've designed an evaluation, if you're wondering what are some of the scales, you can click on display evaluation details, and it will show you the details of this particular question is used in this evaluation, and it will give you the scale details as well. This is only for your administrative view. It's never made available to the evaluator. Now, once I click finished, oh, I'm very sorry. Here at the very bottom, I can also customize the comment heading. So if I want to change this, I can change it. I can also customize the question asked about feedback confirmation from the evaluator and feedback confirmation from the evaluatee. By default, the system will provide a yes/no response on the feedback confirmation. It will ask the evaluatee at what point during evaluator and evaluatee in terms of what point during the rotation did they receive a feedback confirmation as well. That's done automatically. That's not something that you customize. Now, once I click on finished for this particular evaluation, it's then made available into my list of existing evaluations, and I'm able to see the ones that are not published and the ones that are published. And this is also where I have my options for controlling a lot of the behaviors here. Now, I did not during the webinar, I did not review every single action item. I only focused on the key action items that were important for our review today. So when you come back in here, if you want to review some of these other options, simply click on the purple question mark that's listed here. You'll get a pop-up screen like this that will have a comprehensive explanation of every single action item on that page and specifically what they represent. So no need to overcomplicate this for yourself. I only focused on the things that were important. Now, as part of reviewing the existing evaluation forms, I want to scroll down and I want to focus on something that I'm really encouraging our programs to focus on, and these are narrative-based evaluation forms. During past webinars, I've discussed these narrative evaluation forms. This is an example of the clinical evaluation form that was developed in partnership with Bassett Medical Center while I was working with Dr. Edward Bischoff. This evaluation form is an EPA-based narrative-only evaluation form. Now, it's called a clinical evaluation form because the idea is at the end of a clinical encounter, that could be at the end of a clinic period. So I have my Wednesday afternoon clinic, or at the end of the week where I had a clinic. It should not be done at the end of a rotation period. It can be, but we want it to be closer to a time where a person can provide feedback on the actual interaction they had with the resident. So if a faculty and a resident are working together over the course of 2, 3, 4 weeks on a continuous basis, then absolutely you can assign this for the end of a rotation. But if a faculty and a resident are only interacting with each other 3 or 4 times during the rotation, I don't recommend assigning a narrative-based evaluation when somebody's only going to interact with me a couple of times. So the idea here is all 6 core competencies are represented, but they're represented in 3 questions. And if any of you want a copy of this in your program, just reach out to client services, and we're more than happy to copy this into your program if you haven't already done so. These 3 questions have narrative-only spaces. So there's absolutely no space for any numerical scores whatsoever. And the faculty is asked to focus on the areas of patient care and medical knowledge, professionalism and interpersonal communication skills, system-based practices, and practice-based learning. Keep in mind that we're looking at this form right now as an administrator. So there's certain things like these options here at the top that you are seeing as an administrator. The faculty does not see this. Now, what's unique about these questions is they are EPA based. So if I expand the details, if you ignore the observed required count here, this is not displayed to the faculty. The faculty is actually provided with guidance on what the topics are they should be focused on. Acquiring accurate relevant history, for example, creating a management plan, or providing age-appropriate screening. So there are specific tactful points that are included in here to help the faculty focus on what they should consider when they're providing a narrative comment. Now, the entire idea of this assessment form here is to allow the faculty to utilize the mobile app and to be able to dictate their narrative assessment directly into the mobile app, so they're not having to type anything. The whole idea is about making this as easy as possible. So I want you to expand that thought process to other rotations. If you're general surgery or OB-GYN or anesthesiology, I want you to think about evaluations that you're designing that might have one single narrative-based question on it. A single question: how was this resident's performance during this encounter? That's it. A single question. The faculty comes out of the OR, whether it's OB, anesthesiology, general surgery, neurosurgery, doesn't matter. And they are asked to provide a single set of narratives. This is an open forum that allows the faculty to comment on their experience. They can focus on everything from communication skills, professionalism, medical knowledge, surgical skills, and technical knowledge. Now, all of this becomes very important because within my evaluations, we have a very special tool that's becoming available to you called My Insights, which is an AI-based tool that will take all these narrative comments and provide you with summative narrative reporting that's competency-based. And in the future, our system, when I say future, I'm talking in the coming months, the system will also provide you with a narrative predictive value, where the AI will actually compare all the narratives that are collected from the residents on the residents, and will compare them against the milestone groups and actually provide you with expected scores of where they're performing along their milestones, all of that based on narratives without focusing on any of the actual scores that you're accustomed to. So I am encouraging you to change your mindset about having evaluations that are just based on scores and think about evaluations that are based on narratives, and to start thinking about using those narrative-based evaluations for our clinical encounters. So that covers our understanding of evaluations here, and we're going to jump towards the latter part of our webinar for today in regards to mapping of our data to the milestones. So we've now talked about designing evaluation forms. I've now talked about narrative-based evaluation forms. And now you have to wonder to yourself, how does all this information get mapped to the milestones? For some of you that are already familiar with mapping, you're already thinking to yourselves that, well, I know how to map my data, and some of you are going to learn this for the first time today. And some of you are going to wonder, well, if I do what my evaluations is guiding me to do narrative-based evaluations, how is all of that going to map to the milestones? And what I'm sharing with you is our system is going to do the mapping of narratives to the milestones for you almost automatically, meaning the narrative predictive value is going to be displayed for you directly within the curricular assessment worksheet. So let's learn a little bit about the mapping process, and then from there we'll build on your future guidance on what to do. So there's 3 ways that you can map questions and data into your milestones. During today's webinar, we've already been reviewing several of these different ways. So method number 1 is very simply, while you're viewing and designing your evaluation form, we already saw that, where directly within the evaluation form, we can map, and we'll take a look at that again. We can map while adding questions into your database. We saw that as well. And we'll look at a third way, which I haven't shown you yet today, which is mapping while reviewing the actual sub-competencies and milestones. I can map data to it as well. So let's take a look at method number 1. Now I call this method 1A because there's a cousin to this as well. So under the menu option, edit evaluations, I can go into view that particular evaluation, and I can select the option for display map to milestones, and it will actually provide me with a map to milestones option. So very easily, I can just open up my existing form, and I can say, well, I want this particular form. I want to look to see what questions this particular form is already mapped to, and something that isn't already mapped there, very easily I can take it and I can map questions directly into it. So that's a super easy way for you to take an existing form that you have, and you want to make sure that data from that form is already mapped. I can do that. So just as a quick example, here I'm pulling up and attending a fellow evaluation form. It has these questions in it, and at the very top I've clicked on display map to milestones. So notice that the map to milestones is red. It's telling me that, hey, you've got an evaluation form that you're using, but you don't have any of the data, the scores mapped to the milestones. So what can I do? Just simply you click map to milestones. I get another pop-up over here. This is for fellow as an example. I'm going to say, well, this particular question is going to get mapped to interpersonal communication skills. This question is about establishing a therapeutic relationship with patients, and I'm going to map it to ICS-1, map to question. Great, that one is mapped, and then I'll go through the next one. I'll map all those together. I'll then go to the bottom of the page, click update, and now that particular evaluation question, just that one question, is now mapped to the milestones. So of course, I'd go through the exercise of mapping all the particular questions. Now, I call this method 1A because method 1B is when I'm designing an evaluation in the Express module, I can also map it. So I can map it by viewing an existing evaluation form. I can also map it when I'm editing or designing an evaluation form as well. And I already showed you how to do that very simply. When I go to design an evaluation, I select a question, I can click map to milestones, and it provides me with a mapping ability. And always remember, questions can be mapped to multiple milestone subcompetency groups. So a question doesn't have to be mapped to a single subcompetency group. So if you have a question that deals with professionalism and communication skills, you can map those simultaneously. The second method is under Manage Question Database, where I can actually go. We already looked at this as well. It allowed us to add questions and then click Map to Milestones. Again, being able to map those questions to one or more subcompetency groups. And the third method for mapping to milestones is under reviewing the milestone groups, which I'm going to review with you in greater detail right now. So let's go into the hands-on and take a look at that process here. So we're going to go under the menu option Evaluations. Now on the far right-hand side, we have our curricular and milestone management section. And as we scroll down here, we're going to focus, sorry, a little bit too far. As we scroll down here under Manage Milestones and EPA Mapping, we're going to go to Milestone Performance Mapping. So milestone performance mapping is a bit different than mapping a given evaluation form. So if you have a form, you can already see the questions on the form, and you can just map those questions to the milestones. The idea here is, again, this is a demo account, so I have different milestone groups in here. I will, as an example, select internal medicine, just as an example here. First of all, one of the things I can do is I can click on View Milestone Mapping. So it'll take us a second for the system to review all the data that's within the system, and then it brings up the internal medicine milestones. And it's going to show me, if I expand on each one of the subcompetencies, it will actually show me for that subcompetency what are the specific questions and evaluation forms that are mapped to this subcompetency. So by going to the milestone performance mapping, you have the advantage of actually being able to see what data is coming into the subcompetencies. So this is very important. Also, at the very top, if I click on See Omitted Curricular Milestones, it will show me all the questions that are in my database, and it will show me where I'm using those questions. And it's actually guiding me that, hey, you are using this survey and you have this question, but you haven't mapped it to anything. So it's very easy to go into a form and map that question. The idea here is not just to map questions, but to see what is being mapped to the subcompetencies. So it's a much more broad view on what's within your system. So on the left-hand side, under Select Competency, I have a list of all the competencies that have milestones within it. So I'll select professionalism purely as an example. This, for the internal medicine milestone group, it will present me with the 4 internal medicine sub-competencies. They are all in a collapsed mode. If I click on the expand, it will expand that particular sub-competency. Here I can see the sub-competency. This sub-competency here, you can even customize it if you wanted to. If you wanted to add some descriptions in there, that's perfectly up to you if you want to do that. Please do it judiciously. And these are the levels of the milestones. Remember that every bullet point represents a single milestone. This is also the place where I can set levels of readiness. So here in the orange, you can see there's a key here. The orange represents the group average within your department. What is the average performance of PGY1s in your department? The blue represents the national average. This is, we call it the MECNA. MEC stands for myvaluations.com national average. So it's our system looking at all the PGY1 data with regards to professional behavior for internal medicine. It gives you an average. You are then able to set a benchmark of where you expect your residents to be. Maybe you expect your interns to be at a level 3 in terms of professional behavior, or better yet, at a level 4. So you could set the benchmark, and these benchmarks will show up on the curricular assessment worksheet, which we review in other webinars. But here is also your ability to map evaluation questions. Add curricular milestones is where you can actually map individual questions. So when I click on add curricular milestones, notice that I'm under professional behavior. Because I'm under professional behavior, which is part of professionalism, right? That's what I've selected here. When I go to add a curricular milestone, the system is defaulting to professionalism. Now I can select any other competency category, just like when I'm designing an evaluation. So I can map interpersonal communication skill questions to professionalism if I choose to. I can also go through here and select questions that I want to map, and then either at the top I can click on add as curricular milestone, or at the bottom. It doesn't matter, in either place. And here I can also see on the right hand side, I can see the question, which evaluation forms these questions are listed in. So it gives me the ability to do everything in one place. Now, the reason I want to show you this area is because in addition to mapping particular evaluation questions, you can also map quiz questions. So you can use the myvaluations.com quiz module that's available under Learning, where you can develop quizzes and map quiz questions. You can also map EPAs, which we're not covering in this webinar. We have a separate webinar for that. You can map the performance of specific procedures, and you can map conference attendance. So the reason I came under professionalism is to give you the idea that you could take your conferences and say, hey, attendance at the Continuity Clinic and Grand Rounds, for example, are important parts of professional behavior. And the system, by you adding as a conference, the system will now track their attendance at the conference and include that as part of their milestone performance calculations. So it really becomes an important part of mapping your data for the milestones. I know that's a little bit outside of the scope of evaluations, but I just wanted to cover that particular point with you as just a point for mapping. So all of this was the hands-on section for how to map your data to the milestones. And the very last part of this webinar focuses on generating reports. So this is a very easy, straightforward process where I can generate a milestone narrative report that's accessible from the menu option evaluations. At the very bottom, we have a milestone narrative report. For today's webinar, in preparation for the managing the CCC, I want to focus on generating a final narrative report for the ACGME. My recommendation for you is when you select the milestone narrative report, you want to select performance included to be final only. I am showing you what the screen looks like by default. So you can see it's by default set to provisional and final. So I suggest you change that to final only. And then for the options on the right-hand side, select exclude for all of them, because when you're generating a report to key in your data into the ADS, you don't need all that extra information. You can just do exclude on all of them, and then you want to click generate report, and that's going to give you a report that looks like this. And we'll look at this in just a second. We'll run that really quickly. When you get this report, on the very top, you have an option to click export to Excel, and that's going to give you an Excel export. I recommend that you generate that export file. I find that the export file is much easier to use when you're keying your data into ADS. As of this recording, the ACGME still does not offer a method for importing your data from My Evaluation. So unfortunately, you have to manually key in that information. So let's do a very quick hands-on for the last part here. So back under the menu option evaluations, we scroll down on the right-hand side to the very bottom, looking at the curricular milestone report section. We're going to go to the milestone narrative report. Now here we're going to, because we're in a demo account, we're going to select our internal medicine milestone group as an example. We can select multiple residents. For this example, I'm only going to select one resident. I come down to step 3. I want to generate a report for period 1, for example, or if you're generating for period 2, I select final only. And I'm going to do exclude for all these other options here, because I just want a clean report that doesn't have all the other gobbledygook that I don't need. So it's a quick and easy way for you to be able to generate a report. We'll wait for that to come up.